Welcome to the Lacole Cycling Club. In this video, I'm going to share some tips with you to help when riding in excessive heat. The very definition of a heat wave is a relatively short period of weather carrying abnormally excessive temperatures when compared to that location's normal climate. Because of this, the chances of us adapting to this increase in temperature are relatively slim. Sure, some of us do cope better with warmer weather, whereas others, like myself, do tend to struggle. The tips in this video are tried and tested with years of experience and are guaranteed to help you perform that little bit better when the temperature does increase. If you have any tips for coping mechanisms that you like to use for when riding in excessive heat, please drop them in the comments below. I'd be interested to see how you cope with it as well. Tip number one is the most important, and that is ensuring you are fully hydrated before you head out on any training rides. If it's been an exceptionally hot period of weather for more than just a few days, the chances are you're going to require some electrolytes in your drinks because water is not the most effective means at hydrating fully. This doesn't mean that everything you drink needs to contain an electrolyte, but ensuring that 2 500ml bottles daily contain a dedicated hydration mix will help combat dehydration. And then when you're out on your ride, maybe you want to stop at a cafe, it's probably best to avoid diuretics such as tea, coffee and alcohol. By all means, enjoy one of the former, but if you do, bear in mind that it could negatively impact how you feel on your bike afterwards. When riding in warmer weather, you want to surpass the generic advice of consuming 500 ml of fluid per hour. Depending on your own sweat rate, you could well look at least doubling these figures. With this in mind, you'll want to plan your route accordingly, thinking of opportunities to stop and refuel, and perhaps opportunities to look for even more shelter. Wooded and forested areas are a great place to ride when the temperature's hot. Even just a few degrees makes a huge difference as the sun struggles to penetrate the canopy. And then when you return home, your focus needs to return straight back to that rehydration. Personally, I prefer a glass of tap water at room temperature. This is because it can prevent any digestive discomfort. However, you personally may not have an issue with this, and a glass of icy cold water or a bottle of icy cold water can be a great way to help reduce your core body temperature when returning from training. The timing of your training can be incredibly helpful when looking to combat excessive heat. Heading out early in the morning, just as the world is starting to warm up, and coming back before the peak heat of the midday temperatures starts to set in is a really good way to enjoy training in a heat wave. Equally, you might find it incredibly refreshing to head out into the cooler temperature as the sun sets into the early evening. The only thing I would advise is avoid any really intense exercise in the evening because you'll struggle to cool down in the middle of a heat wave, and it can affect your sleep quality, negatively impacting your training and your recovery. Another great tip is to adapt the clothing that you have. Lightweight jerseys exist, lightweight clothing exists that provide better breathability, but you can also take the clothing that you already have and use it to your advantage as a defense against the heat. For example, soaking a jersey in cool water and placing it in the fridge, putting it in the freezer and then putting it on. It can temporarily act as an ice vest. It also means you don't need to wear and buy a dedicated ice vest and then jettison it somewhere in the middle of a training ride. This is something that Grand Tour riders really use effectively when they're doing the warm-ups to keep the core body temperature cooler before intense exercise, and it can work really well for you as well. Another really great tried and tested tip is using ice cubes. You can use these in some arm warmers, stuff them up the sleeve. You can use them in a sandwich bag around the back of your neck, under your collar, or you can put them anywhere that the blood is flowing relatively close to the skin. Use a pair of old tights. These are really popular methods in the world of cycling and have been used for years and years. Anything that you can do to regulate your body temperature on the bike in excessive heat will help you perform better. Heat acclimation isn't quite as effective, but a recent study at Bath University found up to around 65% of the same adaptations were discovered when comparing heat acclimation to altitude training. With this in mind, athletes and people conducting endurance exercise should look to follow similar advice to training at altitude. That is, accept a reduction in performance, train at a reduced intensity whilst the body is adapting to these new conditions. And then when the conditions pass, you can look to reap the rewards of the training that you put in. Always wear sunscreen. I'm sure I don't need to sing the song to you. Most people wear sunscreen to prevent them from harmful UV rays and sunburn. But did you know, by reducing your chances of sunburn, you're also reducing your chance of heat stroke. If your body has to work harder to combat the sunburn, increasing its core temperature, it increases your chance of heat stroke. Wearing a sport-specific sunscreen which is resistant to sweat will help keep you training and your core body temperature lower, reducing your risk of any type of sunstroke, heat stroke, or associated illness. Right, finally, we're going to move on to medication. Now, this is an absolute last resort, and I think anyone that's having to take medication, such as those used when someone's experiencing a fever, something like paracetamol, if you're using this to maintain your body's core temperature, I highly advise against actually training. In these cases, if you really want to ride your bike, I recommend incredibly light and incredibly short exercise. Something like a recovery ride for 30 to 60 minutes will be more than enough. Rest really is best sometimes, and you can look to get back on your bike when the weather temperature has reduced. I've left out a few obvious things like freezing your bottles before going on the bike. That's partly because you want to be hydrating. You want to actually be able to drink those drinks from the moment you leave. I'd love to know if you have any tips, drop them in the comments below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the video and you found the tips useful. I look forward to seeing you again soon.